Can I guarantee it to you? No. The best game ever made, and it's not for you. Hey, it's Chris. So I told you why you should consider backing Enormity from Into the Unknown, right? Well, now I am here going to be telling you why you should not be backing this game. Because if there's nothing else I love doing on this channel, apart from one, just talking about board games in general, it's playing devil's advocate. So that's the purpose of this video. You looking at it? You thinking about it? Are you convinced? Are you on the edge? Are you FOMO'ing? Let's get you off the edge one way or the other. Hopefully this is helpful. And again, I have to put this disclaimer out there at the beginning of every video. I am a lover of this game. So this video is not coming out of me hating or bashing on a project. It's saying, is this right for you? And sometimes when I talk about things out loud, it helps me figure out that in terms of processing. Hopefully, this can do the same for you. Let's go. So first up, I think with Enormity, we're going to go where I have talked previously, but not always recently on some of the other large crowdfunding campaigns. And that is in the sense that I believe that a lot of these types of games, Enormity included, is a lifestyle game. Now, I have a different definition on this channel of what a lifestyle game is. A lifestyle game meaning you're paying that much money, you need to be getting a certain amount of play out of it, a certain number of logged plays in general. And that's a little bit unpopular. People are like, Chris, that's not how I look at my games. It's just that whether or not I enjoy them, regardless of how many times, that's fine. But if you're going to spend upwards of $100, $200, $300 on this, personally speaking, I like to feel like my paperweights are being used not just to collect dust. I don't know, maybe that's an unpopular opinion. And so can you actually get this played? The biggest barrier, the biggest wall to its predecessor, Aeon Trespass Odyssey. And Aeon Trespass Odyssey as a boss battler, Enormity as being sort of a roguelite, Metroidvania-esque, similar-ish tabletop vibe, port over, if you will. I'm not gonna, go by the exact definition, put an asterisk next to it, but something along those lines if you're looking at it as a console gamer. That big problem was both literal, metaphorical, and physical. What I mean by that is that the literal of getting it to the table is a chore. This is not as big of a chore, but it's still going to have a lot of components that you are utilizing, accessing, having to have available to you on a situation by situation, scenario by scenario. And now because it's linked scenarios, you may not be using a good portion of them, and you're going to have to dig through, finding out, putting away, gathering, collecting, keeping track of all of those aspects like many campaign games drive you to do. Aeon Trespass Odyssey as the preeminent boss battler in the Line of Kingdom Death Monster, as you fight absurdly strong creatures, have minutia adventures in between to bridge the gaps and upgrade your skills, components, and ship in this case, and then repeat back into a narrative-driven boss battle style. Now, this escapes that trope that we've seen with those other previous games, but it still has the same overarching structural system. And because it uses that, because it's still, and this maybe is a good segue to point number 2 here as a little tie-in, 1A, 1B is a little bit of a better connection, maybe more than anything else, is that you are required to have 4 characters in this, just like with Aeon Trespass Odyssey. And with having 4 player boards, the main board, side boards of narrative components that you're going to be keeping track of, the tokens minutia, the card-driven decks upon decks. This is a physical space monstrosity. Not as bad as Aeon Trespass Odyssey, but again, I probably can't actually tell you if it is going to be better or worse at this point because the prototype is just that. It's a prototype skeleton of what to expect with this later on. And then the metaphorical, right? And that way I mean that this is still in the same lines of an Aeon Trespass Odyssey, potentially one of the more complexity in terms of rules, minutia, errata, overhead that you may have in your collection. The biggest criticism across the whole board, hobby scene, whatever you want to call it, is that Aeon Trespass Odyssey is a hard learn. There were even some videos that alluded to how hard it was learned. Wink, wink. And so that is the other thing that I would pose to you. This is not going to be as intuitive as many other games are. This still uses a very stylized system of what they're calling their inverted combat paradigm. It's fancy terminology for saying as you get weaker, you get stronger. You take more damage, you do more, you have the potential for more. The good guys as well as the bad guys. But with that, with the expansive coverage of all things boss, battling, dungeon crawling, fighting, miniatures on a map, it has a ton of stuff to learn. And the upkeep is not to be trifled with similarly between things. And that ties maybe into the next point then as well. And this is probably my biggest concern if you're looking at it from someone like myself. If you watched my other video, I have made this same remark about other people's videos on other large campaigns. And I'm not excluding this from that same critique, right? Because I am also a firm believer in you critique things harder the more you are biased towards them, not less. That is my channel, right? And so with this, as I have leveled at other large campaigns in the past, whatever it may be, your Grim Covens, your Lands of Evershade, other CMON campaigns, whatever that aspect looks like, I always worry that a prototype is a shell of potentially what the finished product would be. Cyberpunk earlier this year, The Witcher from a couple years ago. How does things differ right now, end product? And you might say, Chris, the core mechanics are going to be there all the way no matter what. Those aren't going to change. That's fine. But I don't have some of the core mechanics in this prototype. So you can't tell me, I can't tell you that I am absolutely going to love everything in this game. Everything. I can't. I just can't. I want to. But I also want to help you and be completely and utterly transparent and honest about it. Am I very hopeful? Yes. Do I believe that they can? Yes. Can I guarantee it to you? No. And that is the next main point of this, right? How much stock do you put into potential? This could be the potential GOTY. This could be the potential GOAT, right? However you want to frame it. And again, I say this as someone who had Aeon Trespass Odyssey as their best game of 2022. So I don't say these things lightly. I don't say them, as I said at the beginning, out of a place of jealousy or hatred or misplaced angst or anything like that. I say it out of love. I want to see this overachieve. But there are plenty of us in this hobby. There are plenty of campaigns. There are plenty of crowdfunding games. There are plenty of retail games where it's not that you can't spend that money on potential. It's that you shouldn't. Because the truth of the matter is, when you're at this stage, when you're at this very stage of things, you can't know for certain how risk averse, how reselling averse, how lose or gain some money averse are you? And again, it's not the worried about losing money. It's not that I'm saying you can buy this and gain money if you don't like it. It's a, you know what? Even if you gain $50 on this, it's a hell of a lot of hassle to sell stuff on the secondary market like this nowadays, truth be told, even occasionally. And sometimes peace of mind for me is just not having to even think about that being a realistic option or thought process down the line. Because I don't go into this buying to say, well, if I don't like it, I'll just sell it. That's not why I buy games. And last up, mechanically speaking, right? If you're looking at just from a pure mechanical standpoint, Enormity, as I mentioned earlier, 4 characters. Can you solo manage that? Yes. Is it going to be easier than Aeon, Trespass, Odyssey? Yes. It's still going to be a lot of information. The other thing, mechanically speaking, that you really have to be looking at is the blips, the main mechanism of the enemies spawning. Some people feel very much that it was exciting. Me. I think a lot of other people looking at it going, oh, that's kind of boring, Chris. You've got face down, nameless, faceless enemies that may or may not actually spawn, and you just get to move them tinkering in a zigzag manner along the way and maybe have them run into you, maybe not. Is that something that you would find suspenseful and interesting? Is the horror genre, not the horror where you're presented the monster right from the get-go, or is it more of the M. Night Shyamalan where the lurking, just the when is it, how is it, eventuality of not knowing and then getting that surprise more of your style? If it's not, this game is going to fall completely flat for you. And then again, mechanically speaking, as I mentioned earlier, as a prototype, there are significant mechanisms in this that I am still wondering about. What is the upgrading crafting going to look like dynamically different than an Aeon Trespass? I mean, I like the things that you're unlocking and the ability to upgrade your ship or the elements of the abilities that you're going to have access to, or the Kingdom Death Monster where you get the different forge areas, right? What is this going to look like? How is this going to compare? And again, just like with the slight movement-based grid system here, is this really going to be up your alley? And then the last point is that double-sided action card thing, right? Especially if you're playing at the lower player count with the higher amount of characters, it doesn't sound complicated, right? Because you're only choosing 3 cards or one side of 3 cards every single time. But the optimization, the strategy that goes into that, I should have done this, and then I do this, and then this, can I retcon this, because I already did that, that is going to be potentially a situation. Less so if you're playing at less player counts, but if you get to the 3 or 4 player count, right, that could really be a lot out of your control if someone's not being as optimized and the dynamics that are going to go along with that. Do you like that? And the fact is that the spacesuit and then the player character actions that you're going to be putting together, you know what? You just might not have as much option there as you want. And how those fit together, what's on what back, may not be of your interest. And that could leave you feeling high and dry on some of these missions when you don't necessarily know what you're going up against or what you're going to have to deal with in the first place, because you're acquiring the loot. And most of the time, right, in these games, you get loot that's going to help you progress further, or that's going to be the next setup for whatever else, right? It's like a Metroid situation, hence the Metroidvania-esque, right? And so Metroid sets you up. Well, you can't get past this next point until you get this ability. But is this going to be as straightforward as that, especially with an open world, open ship dynamic? Because the last thing I also want in this is all of the cool stuff hidden well beyond my grasp. I want the cool stuff all the time from the get-go with the ability to get it. I don't want to have to like fudge things or be like, well, maybe we'll just try this again because I really want to get that cool thing, right? That is definitely the temptation in a game like this, because you just want the cool stuff. So give me the cool stuff. Is that going to be this, or is the difficulty curve going to be so dramatically difficult that you don't have the feeling of fun progression with the absolute OP-ness that you can get in some of these games, right? You can look at something like Mindbug at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's fun because everything is OP and you get access to everything along the same time as your opponent. Zombie side, okay, I don't get the OP stuff until the very, very end. So how, what shape, what form do you want of that mixing of dynamics? And then I guess a little bit of pledging info, a little pledging thought, because we talked about it previously in other games and campaigns where we're saying, okay, well, how much are you getting here? How much are you getting here? Is this really worth it? Is it really worth it? You know, again, probably standees are not the reason you're going to get it on crowdfunding. I hate saying that, but I love standees. But oftentimes the standee, the lower level price point on a lot of these campaigns, doesn't always pan out to be the savings, the value that people are looking for, even as someone who's on Team Standee. The other aspect that they say is Dark Side of the Sun is 20 to 30 hours, Assimilation Campaign 30 to 45, Black Compromat 30 to 45, and then Three Laws of Heresy 30 to 45. So even if you say bare minimum there, and that's 110 hours of gameplay. And like I mentioned earlier in terms of this is a lifestyle situation. Are you also one of those people who goes, I have to have it all? You know what? You don't have to have it all unless this is a lifestyle game and you're going to play it that often. Repeated play, repeated leaving it out, repeated ability to get it to the table in short order so you can have cohesiveness in terms of what you were doing, how you were doing it, and remembering all of the minutiae that you have to that I talked about earlier in terms of the rules upkeep. Yeah, then 110 hours is freaking amazing. 110 hours. And that's if you're really, really streamlined and fast. And again, I think it's easy to get lost in the numbers. So let me phrase it in a different way, right? I think that's sometimes more valuable for my mind because you hear those chunks of time and you go, that doesn't sound like a lot. Okay, that is playing it for nearly 2 months straight, 2 hours a night. Okay? And that's on the conservative side, the lower end of all of these things. That is playing 4-hour chunks nearly 30 times, nearly a whole month for 4 hours a day. And that's sometimes feasible. I'm sure some of you will say that in the comment section. And others of you are going, holy crap. And so what is the teardown, set up, put away going to look like in addition? Because with any of these big games, that is always the dilemma that I have yet to see a great solution for in terms of storage, in terms of this goes where, this goes here, understanding, being able to put it back out in quick order, instead scratching your head going, oh geez, which one was the end? How did that, with the size of this table space hog is going to be, there's going to be a ton of that. So what is the storage solution to that? And the put away solution, more importantly. And I guess the last point that I've heard is a little bit divisive mechanically. I prefer the spiral bound notebooks. I actually really like this idea comparatively to the 47 different tiles I'm trying to manage and see what number letter combination they are in a Cthulhu Death Medallion, which size they are, and how they all fit back into the box nicely. So giving me a couple of these spiral bound notebooks, I don't mind that one bit, but I know other people like that more material component to go along with it with the mixing and matching. I think it works better with this scenario, but again, what's your preference, just like standee or miniature? And I guess the last comparison that we have to make mechanically is with some of the enemies in the campaigns that they've shown so far. It kind of makes me again go Nemesis, if you will, where when people talk about Nemesis and they talk about the expansions for Nemesis, even when we look at the first one, we look at the latest with Retaliation. Expansion. Now, slightly different vibe there as a whole, but where the consensus seems to be on the ones that are in people's hands is that the base game gives you more bang for your buck in that regard, and some of the gimmicks or the mechanics that get introduced later on just aren't always what people clamor for the most. And so when you've got these expansions with adding some of those elements, like the infection with one of the expansions, where you're not only having to fight that off within your own body, but you're dealing with wall rats that are rapidly multiplying and mutating and trying to kill you. Is that appealing to you, or are you going to find your zen in just what is the core essential? Because the other thing that we have to talk about on crowdfunding all the time is that core pledges, core experiences tend to get the most amount of attention. It's not to say expansions don't get as much, but overarchingly, the Venn diagram, the bell curve, if you will, tends to be that the core is best. Expansions can fall much further anywhere up or down the bell curve. Much better, adding a whole lot of cool stuff and awesome stuff. Also, not balanced and not incorporating things that you really want. And the problem with this is you don't know where these expansions are going to fall either. I don't, you don't, and that's okay. But again, point number 2 in terms of potential. So all in all, those are my final thoughts on things. As this campaign dies down, does it have amazing potential? Yes. Do I want it to absolutely blow things out of the water like Aeon, Trespass, Odyssey did out of nowhere the first time around? Yes. Are you willing to put your money out there during the campaign, late pledging, or picking up on the secondary market? Well, do what's right for you, but hopefully this is helpful in terms of you figuring out truly whether or not this game is right for you. Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks, hypes, or says, is it absolutely right for you? That's the most important thing out of any game in any of these situations. Your money, your game, your play, your fit. And of course, as always, here at the end, I have to put out there that, if this helped you save money, or in case it didn't and you went in anyway, consider backing me on Patreon. Help me help you save more money that way, even though that's a weird thing to say as well. So there you go. Stay classy. Have a great freaking fantastic day. Peace out. See you around.